Korean War. Abstract. Military stalemate. Korean demilitarized zone established. South Korea. United Nations. Together, 972,334. Together, 1,742,000. Total dead and missing, 170,927 dead and 32,585 missing, 162,394 South Koreans, 36,574 Americans, 4,544 others. Total wounded, 566,434. Total dead and missing, 398,000,926,000 dead and 145,000 plus missing, 335,000,526,000 North Koreans, 208,729,400,000 Chinese, 299 Soviet. Total wounded, 686,500. The Korean War was a war between North Korea and South Korea, with the support of the United Nations, principally from the United States. The war began on June 25, 1950, when North Korea invaded South Korea following clashes along the border and insurrections in the south. The war ended unofficially on July 27, 1953 in an armistice. After the surrender of Japan, at the end of World War II, on 15 August, officially 2 September, 1945, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel into two zones of occupation. The Soviets administered the northern half and the Americans administered the southern half. In 1948, as a result of Cold War tensions, the occupation zones became two sovereign states. A socialist state was established in the north under the totalitarian leadership of Kim Il-sung and a capitalist state in the south under the authoritarian leadership of Syngman Rhee. Both governments of the two new Korean states claimed to be the sole legitimate government of all of Korea, and neither accepted the border as permanent. North Korean Korean People's Army, KPA, forces crossed the border and drove into South Korea on June 25, 1950. The United Nations Security Council denounced the North Korean move as an invasion and authorized the formation of the United Nations Command and the dispatch of forces to Korea to repel it. The Soviet Union was boycotting the UN for recognizing Taiwan as China, and China was not recognized by the UN, so neither could support the PRK. 21 countries of the United Nations eventually contributed to the UN force, with the United States providing around 90% of the military personnel. After the first 2 months of war, South Korean Army, ROKA, and American forces hastily dispatched to Korea were on the point of defeat, retreating to a small area behind a defensive line known as the Pusan Perimeter. In September 1950, a risky amphibious UN counteroffensive was launched at Incheon, cutting off KPA troops and supply lines in South Korea. Those who escaped envelopment and capture were forced back north. UN forces invaded North Korea in October 1950 and moved rapidly towards the Yalu River's border with China. But on October 19, 1950, Chinese forces of the People's Volunteer Army, PVA, crossed the Yalu and entered the war. UN retreat from North Korea after the first phase offensive and the second phase offensive, then Chinese forces were in South Korea by late December. In these and subsequent battles, Seoul was captured 4 times, and Communist forces were pushed back to positions around the 38th parallel, close to where the war had started. After this, the front stabilized, and the last 2 years were a war of attrition. The war in the air, however, was never a stalemate. North Korea was subject to a massive U.S. bombing campaign. Jet fighters confronted each other in air-to-air combat for the first time in history, and Soviet pilots covertly flew in defense of their communist allies. The fighting ended on July 27, 1953, when the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed. The agreement created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, to separate North and South Korea, and allowed the return of prisoners. However, no peace treaty was ever signed, and the two Koreas are technically still at war, engaged in a frozen conflict. In April 2018, the leaders of North and South Korea met at the DMZ and agreed to work toward a treaty to formally end the Korean War. The Korean War was among the most destructive conflicts of the modern era, with approximately 3 million war fatalities and a larger proportional civilian death toll than World War II or the Vietnam War. It incurred the destruction of virtually all of Korea's major cities, thousands of massacres by both sides, including the mass killing of tens of thousands of suspected communists by the South Korean government, and the torture and starvation of prisoners of war by the North Koreans. North Korea became among the most heavily bombed countries in history. This project compresses information gathered from Wikipedia in video format. Why should I watch it? Studies prove that reading while listening improves comprehension, increases speed as well as expands vocabulary and enhances fluency. Provide your feedback on the comments section. Support the channel by subscribing and liking the video. Thanks.